Hello, everybody. Welcome to the remarkable photographs of Leon Abdalian. I'm Gretchen Grozier from the JP Historical Society, and I'm super excited to welcome you today. This event has been a long time in the coming. I think I first got in touch with Aaron maybe 5 years ago. We saw the collection online and we realized that this was a story that needed to be told. And things were going on. There were lots of projects at the library and they were digitizing more of the photographs. So we were waiting and waiting. We finally scheduled it and then the pandemic hit. So it was supposed to be on last spring. We rescheduled it and then poor Aaron couldn't even get into his office still. So we had to schedule it again. And so today, April 25th, 2021, we are finally having this event. I actually think it's kind of an interesting twist of fate that yesterday, the president finally used the words Armenian genocide. So I think maybe Leon Abdalian has something to do with that in the background. So before I introduce Aaron, I just wanted to let you know that this program was actually funded by a grant from the Bridge Street Fund for Mass Humanities, and we're very appreciative of that funding. It's very helpful. I also wanted to let you know that we do have other events coming up. Book talk next month from Joe Bagley, the city architect, the city archaeologist who's doing Boston's oldest buildings and where to find them. And several of those buildings are in Jamaica Plain. And he did get in touch with us when he was researching that book and very kindly is coming to speak. We're also co-hosting with the Boston Public Library JP branch, the Boston Women's Heritage Trail and the Arboretum, a film screening about Blanche Ames, who is a suffragist who has an interesting connection to JP. So you can sign up for those events at our website. And we're also starting our annual walking tours. Those go every Saturday from Saturday, May 22nd, they'll go through sort of the middle of October. So we hope that you will come on a walking tour. Those details are on our website. And really quickly, if you're interested in the Jamaica Plain Historical Society or what we're doing, we can sign up for our monthly newsletter that goes out sort of the beginning of every month. Mostly. Sometimes we take a month off here or there, but we won't spam you or anything, but you'll get to know what we're doing, what's going on in JP history. And then if you don't want to get a newsletter, you can also just follow us on social media. We post everything there as well. You can always become a member as well. Our events are always free and open to the public, and we rely on grant funding and memberships to support what we do and the website and everything that we have. So if you're interested in JP history and want to help us preserve and promote it, then you can become a member, and that will definitely help us. And everything is available on our website, which is www.jphs.org. During the talk, there's a button at the bottom of your screen called Q&A. That's questions and answers. If you could put your questions for Aaron in there, he'll do his presentation, and then we will take those questions at the end of the talk and get to as many as we can. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and introduce you to Aaron Schmidt. He has worked at the Boston Public Library for quite some time. I'll let him tell you how long. He's photographed some prints, and that's part of the special collections. So take it away, Aaron.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out on this Sunday, or not coming out on this Sunday, to join us for this long delayed talk, but maybe propitiously delayed, as Gretchen mentioned, because of the historic announcement by the president yesterday. Very appropriate. Not planned by us. I've been at the library for over 30 years. I started in 1989, and I've been at the print department and now special collections and arts departments basically since then, and right now serving as curator of photography. So I've been in sort of nominal charge of the Leon Abdalian collection since 1991. So this is really, I'm thrilled to be able to share it with everybody. I think that may be all I have to say about myself, but I am happy to get started with this and show you some pictures, which are really the star of the show. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen, and we will get moving. This is a Abdalian photo that's on the screen, a photograph of the library. So I thought that was an appropriate place to start. The Leon Abdalian collection has always been a really highly used and very important part of our larger photo collection. It's relatively small, only several thousand images compared to some collections that we have that are over 1 million images. But it's definitely one of my favorites and has been an important collection and a well-used collection for many years. I wanted to put the acknowledgements up front because I wanted people not to feel guilty about sneaking off if they had other things to do as the talk goes on. So again, I want to thank the Jamaica Plain Historical Society for setting this up and basically bullying me into doing this, and Gretchen especially for her persistence in keeping after me to get this done. Also, definitely want to thank the family of Arnold and Lillian Clow. Lillian Clow is the daughter of Leon Abdalian, and she gave the first gift, the first installment of the collection to the library in 1969. So we're very indebted to them for their generous gift. There's some maps in the collection in the talk that highlight certain things. So I wanted to make sure that Leventhal Map Center was thanked. The associates of the Boston Public Library underwrote the digitization of the collection, and we wouldn't have this great collection available to the public anywhere in the world, including current present-day Armenia, if it wasn't for them. And of course, the Project SAVE and the Armenian Museum of America in Watertown are just a great resource for information about the Armenian diaspora, especially in the region. So it was hard to come up with a theme for Leon Abdalian's photography because he did a little bit of everything. But what we wanted to do is highlight his history and also the fact that he spent his life capturing history with his camera. The idea of his surviving his history is that he was living in Armenia. He was born in Marush in Cilicia in the Ottoman Empire, and his family escaped to America in, we think, 1896 at the time when the Hamidian massacres were going on. This was sort of a precursor to the genocide that came later in the 20th century. And it seems like it could not be a coincidence that that was the point in time where the family decided to emigrate. And it's always been pointed to me that Abdalian concentrated on historical photographs because he came from a region and he came from a cultural group that basically their history, someone tried to erase their history. And I choose not to think that's a coincidence that he kind of became involved and became interested in the history of his new country. And that became kind of a talisman for him. This map is a detail of a map of Turkey by the American Geographical Society of New York. If you can see my cursor moving around, there's Marush and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, is the city that he was born and came from. I find it interesting that it's a city that's renowned for its ice cream, and Abdalian ended up coming to Jamaica Plain, a neighborhood that's known for the quality of its ice cream as well. So there is some continuity in that. The photograph on the left is Leon, we think is around 6 years old in 1892, at least according to the inscription at the bottom of the mount of this photograph. This would have been 4 years before his family emigrated. And then the photograph on the right is another photograph by another Armenian photographer, Arsene Duran, who ran a portrait studio in Boston that was very successful. And here in this photograph, Leon is now a dashing, sporting American man. He's fully assimilated into his new country. Here's, again, he settles in his new country. He finds he creates a family with his wife, and I'm sure I'm going to mess up this one. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. I assume it's Santoff or something like that. But this photograph in the field, in the flowered field, is Leon with his wife, his daughters Lily and Marion, and his son Herman. And then this photograph to the right is Leon with his weapon, his weapon of choice, an 8x10, I believe, Seneca View camera. And I believe that's in the Arboretum. I don't know where the rest of his equipment is in this photograph, because he would have had a tripod and boxes of glass plates and other paraphernalia in the photograph, and they must be kind of off the frame. As far as we know about Abdalian, he never apprenticed with a professional photographer. He never took classes to be a photographer. He was completely self-taught, and we found in the archival collection that accompanies the photographs many manuals for printing and camera use. And we think our understanding is that he was completely self-taught, and he sort of built his career from the ground up. And one thing I also wanted to stress is that the photograph collection that we have of Abdalian's work is largely a negative collection. It's sort of, probably evenly split actually between original negatives and positive prints. So it is an archival photographic collection. It's not a museum kind of art collection, which of course doesn't take away the beauty of these original objects. And this plate that you see in this frame, the old Suffolk County Courthouse in Pemberton Square, is a 11 by 14 inch glass plate, dry plate negative. And it's just, on its own, it's a beautiful object. One of the great advantages of Abdalian's collection for us as archivists is that he took extensive notes. He was a very serious photographer. He may have only worked part-time, as a photographer during the course of his career, but he took it very seriously, and he had his own numbering system for his photographs, and he would have title and description information. And as you can see there, he had an index to his titles, and then he would have comments about whether a print was good or the second best or the third best, which as a curator of photography is really always interesting to be able to know which photographs he thought as the artist were the best or the most important. He really spent a lot of time on this avocation of his and this vocation of his, and he had a business card that he would distribute and market himself with. The lower left is a sleeve that one of his photographs came from, and he really, he was having, either he was typing in or his daughter Lillian, who helped him a lot in his career, would type in all this extensive information that just adds great value to the photographs. This caption at the top right just shows like the amount of research he would put in to every single photograph that he took. He would do this extensive research to try to identify the site. And again, you can see from this invoice, he was very professional, but in the end, he wasn't doing it for the money, and he probably didn't make a lot of money. But he gave it a shot. So Abdalian, as he settled in Jamaica Plain as his home neighborhood, and he settled into his job as a train conductor, the way he starts as a photographer is he starts to kind of make connections in his neighborhood, his area, and also makes connections with people that could help him in his career as a photographer. It's really important to note that Abdalian was a full-time conductor for the Boston Elevated Railway, at least until his retirement in 1951. So being a professional and commercial photographer was a part-time job for him, which makes his achievements even more elevated. Sorry for the pun. I presume this is the kind of streetcar he would have been conducting during his career, and that's why I took the photograph of it. And then to the right, you see him in his dashing conductor's uniform with his daughters, Marianne and Lillian. And I think, I have this feeling that Leon was one of these conductors, the kind of guy you see on the T who would make friends with the people, who knew people's names when they traveled, maybe had candy for the children. I think he was one of those guys who just sort of reached out and made connections with the people, in this very people-oriented job that he had. Both his jobs, actually, as a conductor and photography, a sense of engagement with people is crucial to being successful in both. He also took advantage of being a conductor by being able to take free rides on the street railway system in the greater Boston area. So when he had to take his heavy equipment, his large view camera, his glass plate negatives, his tripod to a historical site somewhere in the suburbs, he would be able to ride for free and take the lines pretty much anywhere in the greater Boston area that he could get to. So that was probably made his margins a little better on the business side. And then just a beautiful negative showing the elevated that used to run down Washington Street in front of the Cathedral of the Holy Cross. And then he spent a lot of time documenting his own colleagues in the Boston Elevated and MBTA, which it was later known as during his career, including his station master, Frank McAvoy, who was also a World War I veteran, and Jim Callahan at the switch. And we believe all three of these photos are taken roughly at the same time because of the similarity of the car and the man catcher that you see, or person catcher, I should say, that you see in the front of the train. His office basically was the Arborway car barn, was where he basically spent his working life. And here we have a letter that actually explicitly spells out how he would get to his work sites as far as being a photographer. This is a letter from introduction from Arthur D. Gibson, a pianoforte tuner, to a wealthy client, Robert Dunkel, in his house in Brookline, and telling him how to get there on the train and what stop to get off. And here is what the result of that photograph, a series of photographs he took of Mr. Dunkel's house in Brookline. So he's starting to make a business of it early in his career. And again, he started the places he made connections. The hub of his life and his work was the Jamaica Plain neighborhood. And Jamaica Plain, of course, as all of you know, is blessed with having many beautiful natural spaces within walking distance. So obviously a lot of his early and later subjects were the park system, related to the Emerald Necklace Park system, especially the area around Jamaica Plain. I like this really beautiful shot of the Lockstead Avenue side of the pond in 1920. This photograph was actually not identified as Jamaica Pond, and so this is a provisional identification. I'm pretty sure it is. You can see the boathouse in the background, but I'm happy to have somebody disabuse me of that notion if I'm incorrect. But if this is Jamaica Pond, it's just kind of a beautiful example of the changes that have occurred in the neighborhood during Abdalian's time and after. Again, the idea of making connections. Connections can be between people, but also transportation is a way to make a connection from one place to another. And Abdalian as a conductor on the elevated, but also as someone who was interested in horses, carriages, motor cars, all kinds of transportation, he kind of focused on the subject. In the photo on the left, Alice Sargent, I believe, is the Alice Sargent who was the daughter of Charles Sprigg Sargent, who was the founder of the Arboretum, and it was, I think it was an interesting connection for Abdalian because he became later in his career sort of the unofficial photographer of the Arboretum. And then, of course, many of you are familiar with Lars Anderson Park and the Auto Museum. I thought this was a nice shot. Beautiful old car. I don't know if it's still in the collection. And then I was always intrigued by this photograph to the left, the motorcycle, the Ford Service motorcycle. What a great way to go and fix a stranded car back in the day when cars failed all the time and had to be fixed on site. They couldn't be towed anywhere. And just this great scene of a horse-drawn sleigh, and I assume somewhere in Franklin Park or Jamaica, near Jamaica Pond, somewhere in that area. But if anybody can identify the location, that would be great. And this is photographed. This may be the most important or not important, but famous person that he photographed in his career. He wasn't a celebrity photographer, but Eleanor Sears was a noted sportswoman. I think in modern parlance, we would call her a badass. She was a championship tennis, squash player, also a championship horse equestrian. And also she was very interested in automobiles, and she was also one of the first women to fly a plane in America. And she became later in her life famous for walking. She would walk everywhere. She once famously walked from Boston to Providence, and I'm not sure how brief a time, but it was quite brief. And she would just, be on the side of the road, a constant figure on the sides of the road, walking quickly with a walking stick to her destination. Just a lovely photograph at Jamaica Pond, 1913. So again, I mentioned the, kind of the specialty for Leon was historical sites and historical subjects. And that was what it was on his business card, was photographing historical sites, a specialty. And this is kind of his bread and butter. So I think of all the people on the Zoom call, I probably know less about Jamaica Plain history than anyone. So I'm not going to get into specifics about any of the Jamaica Plain sites that we're going to see, but this obviously is a historical house in JP. Just kind of a very emblematic of the kind of work he did as a photographer. And of course, his work took him everywhere around the region, including downtown Boston. Really beautiful photograph of the Union Oyster House, which at one time had been run as a fancy dress goods establishment by Hope Still Capin. Was the original use of the structure when it was first built. The Union Oyster House claims, and I have no reason to dispute this, to be the oldest continuously operating restaurant in the United States. And the oysters are pretty good. Then we have, historic sites for Abdalian weren't necessarily, they weren't necessarily the Freedom Trail. In the old State House photo on the left, it is the Freedom Trail, one of the most famous old buildings in Boston, the old State House. But on the right, we have the old standpipe, I'm going to probably mess up the pronunciation on this as well, but the Katuwit water company standpipe on Fort Hill in Roxbury. Just a beautiful photograph, and you can see that he did some dodging and burning work in the skies to make the skies more dramatic in this photo. I love this view of the Paul Revere House in 1956, just because it's pretty uncommon. You always see that street view where you see the street facade, but you rarely see photographs of the from the backyard in the back piazza behind the house, and it also is proof that there is still developable real estate in undeveloped land in the North End. So we hope it stays that way. Again, another Jamaica Plain landmark, the Elliott School. Again, I won't get into the history because you all know more about it, I hope, than I do. But really, is really preserving the record of some of these old buildings, many of them that are no longer here, and some of them have been altered in the meantime. So the historical part, the capturing the history through his photographs is just, it's a public service in a way, because it preserves these things. And I don't have to tell you as an audience how important that is to preserve visually the history of some of these sites that have definitely changed. he took a lot of graveyard shots. I don't think that means he was morbid. It just meant that so much history is in our graveyard. So here's a photograph in Plymouth of the William Bradford grave. Bradford, who was one of the first governors of the Plymouth colony and one of the first Puritans to come to America. And this photograph and this slide, I should say, kind of highlight his, he's a hustler. He's really hustling in his career. He's not shy. He's in this letter to the right with the photograph of the Wayside Inn and the grist mill. Is a letter to Henry Ford, who was owned the grist mill, owned the Wayside Inn at the time. A letter that's in closing, as it says, some of the photographs he took of the exterior in hopes of getting permission to photograph in the interior. Now, as far as we know, he did not. We do not have any photographs by him of the interior. And I can only speculate that, Ford, being one of the noted anti-Semites and white supremacists in our history and in the history of the 20th century, maybe didn't like the ethnicity of his last name and never allowed him to access the interior. But I could be totally making that up. I could be showing my own bias in that, but I thought it was sort of interesting to show his sort of can-do attitude and really just wanting to get these jobs and get into places and record things. It's a photograph of the Washington elm, which was taken probably several years before the elm actually died, because I think it died in sometime around 1923. So this photograph is sort of preserving the elm on glass and paper, before it died. Also, it's important to know about Abdalian that he was a frequent collaborator with the daily press and with periodicals. His photographs would often appear in Boston newspapers like the Herald, Traveler, and the Boston Globe. And in this case, a series, he provided many of the photographs in a series published by the Boston Post in 1940. So he was very active in editorial work. Abdalian may not have been morbid, but I am a little bit. So I put these two photographs together because they're sort of a juxtaposition of the teeming life in the streets in front of the old corner bookstore and the teeming death in Copp's Hill burying ground. Just layers and layers of historic people buried in the space. So that's my morbidity, not his. This is a poor juxtaposition because the letter to the left has nothing to do with this photograph, but the letter does continue to show how he worked with other distributors of photography to get his photographs out there and to make a little extra money. This is a letter to a frequent correspondent, E.P. Jones, who is the Boston agent for Ewing Galloway, a major Washington, D.C. photo distribution and photo service. And this just a beautiful photograph of the Custom House Tower and the old grain exchange in 1920. So again, he was very active in trying to get his work out there and trying to get commissions. But it's not all about sober history with Abdalian. He could have fun too. He liked fun and sun as much as the next guy. So he did often take photographs of recreational sites and events. I included this photograph just because I drive by this all the time, and I never knew it had this like busy canoe rental and recreation spot. This is off Route 1 in West Roxbury after Millennium Park, and it's just a kind of wonderful photograph. And then. I don't know about you guys, but when I look at this photograph, I want people like you're standing too close. Like, even though this is 1930 and the pandemic, the influenza pandemic is well past and the coronavirus is well in the future, but it makes me nervous to see the people like this. So I feel like I want to get them to disperse a little bit. You can see on the upper left that you can see some of the amusements that were at Revere Beach. In the distance. And that leads us to this picture of the Derby Racer, which was a famous roller coaster at Revere Beach. This is a photograph taken in 1920. And you can see that Abdalian would often incise his negatives with his photo credit, the photo number that he assigned to it from his homegrown identification system. And in this case, the title of Derby Racer carved into the awning over the public entrance to the roller coaster. You should know about this roller coaster that it had a very poor safety record. And this is the first iteration of the Derby Racer that this was taken some years before it was torn down and another one put in its place. This is, you know, a circus photo, obviously. I'm pretty sure the word on the banner to the left is mysterious. The word to the right could be river or something else, but if there's anybody in the audience who might know what circus this is, we'd love to hear about it, because it's frustrating me that I can't figure out what circus this is. But this is a photograph of the circus performers. Really wonderful, wonderful group portrait. So again, the transportation, he photographed this beautiful railroad car that was someone put together to advertise the Canopy Lake Ballroom. It's a photograph taken in 1932. And it's of note that this figure to the left, the man standing to the left, I believe is his son, Herman Abdalian. So this may have been a summer job or a summer gig for Herman, working for the Canopy Lake Ballroom. The photo to the right is, we believe, is a photograph taken from a Columbus Day Parade march. This is some marchers carrying a banner that says Coronation of the Chinese Emperor. And including the amusements, he also took photographs of nature as well. And he was a prolific nature photographer, at least the kind of landscape nature that we have in the city. So we definitely wanted to highlight the Franklin Park and connection. He took a lot of photographs in Franklin Park. Here's a photograph of the rock garden and the birdhouse in Franklin Park circa 1930, and the beautiful photograph with this dramatic sky that he's burned in using darkroom techniques to make this image more dramatic and bring out the sky a little bit. Just kind of a beautiful vertiginous angle and a dramatic sky for this Wards Pond photo in 1929. We go back to Charles Sprague Sargent, the founder of the Arboretum. This is his estate, Home Lee in Brookline in 1916. Just a beautiful shot composition with this sort of winding pathway through the estate's grounds. Again, this kind of implies that Abdalian had a personal connection to the family, which may have helped him get access to the Arboretum and be a frequent documenter of that park. Which brings us to the Hilltop Lilacs in the Arboretum, a beautiful photograph of a pathway that shows this sort of oval masking. That was something he often did when he printed his negatives, to give sort of artistic effect to the photographs and also possibly crop out imperfections on the edges of the negatives. And a photograph that I'm surprised we don't have a print of this photograph. We only have the original negative. This image to the right is a photograph is a scan of the original negative, and it's a surprise that it was never printed because it's such a beautifully composed photograph of Wardsbrook Pool in 1920. This is a beautiful, perfect photo with a caption that apparently, my understanding, is totally inaccurate. There is no such thing as an ash birch. I'm not sure if this was just a mistaken title by Abdalian or whether it's someone was misreading the handwriting, but it is this beautiful photograph of some type of birch, a birch stand growing in the Arboretum in 1939, using this kind of beautiful shadow effect on the snow. Really lovely, lovely photograph. So that leads us to more fun with photographs. He took fun subjects, but he also had fun making the photographs. And he had some tricks up his sleeves, quite literally. So this next section, we'll talk a little bit about his tricks and also about his relationship with the photographic hand colorist George A. Braun from Connecticut. They had a long time collaboration and resulted some really beautiful hand colored photographs. Using Leon's photographs as the basis. So this is the trick. This is a zonal multiple exposure photograph of Leon Abdalian's daughter Lillian, taken in 1915. So the little girl who appears in this picture is Lillian, all three times. Not cloned, but exposed using a system that Abdalian invented in different areas of photograph. And really the artistry in this would be to make these exposures seamless with dodging and burning that you'd have to do to kind of mask out where these rigid hard edges of a mask that he would place over the negative during exposure, would allow for sort of even exposure through the image. It was really a difficult process, and I haven't quite figured out all the steps of how he did it. But we do have these three photographs. This is a negative, original negative of a local JP kid, Bill Gary, who is posing as the batter, catcher, and pitcher in his own photograph. And so what Abdalian would do with these photographs is he had a mask that he put in the holder that had slots cut into it. And the subject of the photograph would have to stand in a slot while a strip was lifted out and expose just that area of the photograph. And then they would move to the other section and be exposed there, and then move to the third section and be exposed there. The result would be this photograph, which is not perfect. You can see that the pitcher is missing part of his toe. And the catcher is missing part of his forearm, and you can see the shadows are a little weird, showing where the image was masked out. The pitcher's shadow ends because it just never got exposed. The batter shadow does exist in the frame, which probably means that the batter, the central figure, stood and in that spot for a bit while the rest of the image was exposed before it was masked out to allow the other slots to be exposed and to create this sort of fun effect that Abdalian really loved to do. I mentioned, I think I failed to mention that the collection was the result of two gifts. One in 1969, which is mostly glass plate and film negatives given by his daughter Lillian to the library, and then a 2003 gift, which was the remainder of the collection, which included many photographic prints and archival material related to Abdalian's career, like correspondence, and even like pharmacy receipts. It was a little bit of everything. And the revelation was seeing the printed photographs because it showed what an artist he was at the printing part of photography. And so next section is illustrating that. We have the original glass plate of a yacht off Pemberton Point in Hull, and then this sort of soft focus print, almost pictorialist print that he made kind of on a matte paper. It's it has a lot of atmosphere and effects from that kind of soft focus and the paper fibers that you can see in the photograph. And then he printed these two additional black and white photographs, one with a warmer tone and a kind of a lighter sky. And then in the other photograph, he made it a more neutral tone by either toning it differently or toning it less during the developing process. And he made a more kind of dramatic nighttime sky. So really from one image, he's creating multiple objects or unique kind of prints from the one original image. And then because of his collaboration with George A. Braun, you have his color photographs, which are literally unique images since they are hand colored. Every one of these photographs that Braun colored for Abdalian, even though the bones of the photograph is Abdalian's photograph, the skin is the color and makes it a completely unique image, and could have totally different kind of emotional effects, like on the viewer, depending on the way it was colored. I'm running out of water, so I might get a little raspy, but I'll try to nurse it as I go along. Again, some more of the collaborative work he did with Braun, really some beautiful photographs. I have to admit I'm kind of biased against hand-colored photographs because I've seen so many historical photographs, beautiful historical black and white photographs in our collection ruined by really bad hand coloring. There's really a lot of variance in quality, let me say, but Braun was really a master. He was an artist in his own right. Like this photograph, I remember seeing this in person for the first time and trying to figure out if it was a color photograph. It's so beautifully and delicately and realistically colored. And the only reason I knew that it was definitely a hand colored and not a true color photograph is it would have been faded and color shifted if it had been an actual vintage photograph from early period on a color base, because that was a main problem of color photography. It was just, it would color shift and it just wasn't hardy. It didn't last long. And again, the kind of showing the intricate, painstaking nature of the hand coloring that Braun would do in kind of the detailed swirls of the water of this mill in Newton Upper Falls in 1936. Braun was definitely an artist. And I think like Leon, it was never about the money. I think a lot of times both these guys probably didn't make a lot of money because they were such perfectionists and craftsmen that it kind of undercut their business plan. But the result is this beautiful, beautiful collection. And we get to Citizen of Jamaica Plain. So what I find interesting about Leon is that he originally lived in Dover Street in the South End. I'm not sure if that's where his family settled in when they came to Boston, but that was the original address we have for him is Dover Street, which is now East Berkeley Street in the South End. But after he moves to Jamaica Plain, that's it. That's where he is. He's in Jamaica Plain. He never leaves it again, which I think is definitely, instructive about his love of the neighborhood and how the neighborhood was home for him. And again, for me, this goes back to the genocide, the idea of that his family fled, a place where his history as a person was being erased, where his home could be taken and just given to another family with no recourse. The idea that he became this recorder of history, of historical images, and also stayed in Jamaica Plain his whole life, I think is I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's emblematic of that the importance that history and home have for you when someone tries to take it away from you and everyone like you. So he did photograph a lot on JP. I'm not sure why he took this photograph of 19 Elliott Street in 1951. It may have been, a commission for the client, the person who owned the house. You can see this beautiful growth of wisteria that's totally out of control. And then the same house you can see on the Google Street View shot to the right. I just kind of thought it was cool to be able to see the. I know we really don't need Abdalian, people like Abdalian capturing photographs of every building in the world, because now we have Google to do it for us. So things have changed a little bit on that score. I wanted to include the Captain May house just because it's one of my favorite over-the-top houses in Boston. This photograph was taken in 1940, and even a gifted photographer like Leon Abdalian would sometimes get his thumb in the exposure. So, that's okay. Usually he didn't, and he could have masked it out and made the print of this regardless. But of course, I remember the May House mostly from the sort of semi-recent War of the Christmas Lights that went on, maybe 10 years ago. But really, this was originally a colonial house that was completely just decimated by this weirdo renovation and the addition of the kind of stonework and the castle features. So I kind of love this house. I wish I lived in it. He would document the life in Jamaica Plain, and that would include public service employees, in this case, first responders. We have Harry Supernard of the Station 13, the precinct that serves Jamaica Plain, on his patrol bike in 1939. And this photograph of Engine 28, Ladder 10, in 1939. This was a long time house that serves Jamaica Plain, which of course was torn down to be replaced by the modern firehouse that's still also Engine 28, Ladder 10. This photograph, this is a rare occasion where I didn't use Abdalian's own title for this. He just titled it, I actually don't remember what he titled it. I added the mailman because I was struck by the fact that they really were mailmen back in the day, because every single person in this photograph is a man. And obviously that has changed fairly dramatically. But this is still a beautiful post office and a beautiful group shot of people serving the neighborhood. I included this photograph just because it's sort of a mystery to me. There's a whole bunch of photographs dealing with this this gentleman whose name is Fred Leonard Warren Jr., who seemed to be running some sort of school in JP, and it had this playground that he called the Wonderland. And this is the Mayflower in the Wonderland. So I don't know if anybody out there might know the mystery of this, but we'd love to hear about it, because I'd love to know, what the deal was with Mr. Warren and his school. And I realized too, I'm concentrating on the PowerPoint, but some of you may be in chat answering some of these questions, so we'll get to that at the end. He photographed a lot of the businesses in the neighborhood. Here's this is actually Bob Restuccia. Bartholomew Bob Restuccia was his a friend of his, but he also was a proprietor at the Bob Spa. This beautiful pairing of the interior and the exterior, and you might have seen this in other photo arrays earlier in the slides, but you can see how you have the warm tone image to the left and the neutral tone image to the right. And this is basically how you tell in the collection whether the photograph was scanned from original negative or whether it was scanned from an existing print. You can see actually the plate holder marks on the negative to the right. So really this object the image has been inverted to a positive, but this object to the right the original is and remains a negative. And there was no print ever made of the exterior as far as we know. Then we have, I know I'm going to butcher this. I think Hagop Arzuheljian was another friend of Abdalian who worked at James Tailoring in 1949. And it wasn't until I was typing out this caption that I realized that James Tailoring is kind of funny. I kind of thought maybe their motto should be, if you've seen fire and you've seen rain, we can get out that stain. But sorry for the dad joke, but I just had to throw that in there. Then this photograph of Albert J. Gagnon, a plumber in Jamaica Plain on Center Street. I'm not sure I'd hire this guy. He seems a little not quite proactive enough for me. Like you might have to wait a long time to get that clog out, but I did love this little detail of the spaniel resting on the file cabinet next to him. And again, more businesses that he documented in Jamaica Plain. There's Jones Camera and Gift. With the woman in the center, I believe, is Eleanor S. Klee, who is the proprietor of the Center Street shop. And Richard's Drugstore in 1953, also on Center Street. And then this wonderful photograph of the Mellow Fuel truck, a Mellow Fuel Company fuel truck in 1951. Again, Abdalian just loving cars and making them look good. One of the things Leon did after his retirement as a conductor in 1951, he was basically a full-time photographer. And one of the frequent bits of work he did were going into people's homes, usually his neighbors and people in the Jamaica Plain area, and taking family portraits in their homes. This is kind of a lovely photograph of John W. Dunn and his family, and you can see actually the two chihuahuas that are nestled in the laps of his two daughters. Just a nice scene. And when he took these photographs of other families in the area, often they were fellow Armenians. And one thing I was struck, there's maybe 100, 200 photographs of these kind of house portraits of families. And in the Armenian photographs, you frequently see a beautiful rug juxtaposed with a new television set with the rabbit ears. And I think it's sort of this idea of the sort of status symbols of both the old and new worlds kind of being put together. Like I said, Abdalian lived his whole life in Jamaica Plain. We have a piece of correspondence where he was begging for a friend to help get him into Boston Housing Authority home for the elderly on Horn Avenue in Jamaica Plain, and he was ultimately successful. So here he is 2 years before his death, and he's still photographing. He's still carrying his camera with him everywhere. As you can see in this photograph of the building he lived in 1962, and a photograph of a woman who worked at the Boston Housing Authority office in 1965. And then finally, wrap it up with what, at least as far as what we have in the collection, is Leon's last known photo, which was just the only information on the sleeve was Mary D, which we assume was the person who paid him to take photographs of his family, but I don't know who she is or where this photo was taken. But May 14th, 1967 is the date, and Abdalian died in 1967. So I think he must have been buried with the speed graphic, I think. So that's it. I've ran through everything. I think I only forgot half of what I meant to talk about. But let me stop sharing, and I'd be happy to answer any questions people had.
That was fantastic. It was so worth the wait. All those years of waiting to see that. There are lots of questions, and people, you can still put in questions in the Q&A. It's at the bottom of the screen. We can start from this one that's sort of about the origins of him coming. Ava asks, do you know how the family was able to fund their escape to America? And then once they got here, how did they support themselves?
It's that kind of, even though we do have some archival material related to the family, that period between them leaving Armenia and coming to America, I don't even know for sure if they came directly to Boston, if they came through the East Boston Immigration Center, or whether they came through Ellis Island and settled in Boston. I'm just not sure. Obviously, with new immigrants, often they were moving to cities where they already had family. It may be that he was pre-connected to the region through family members. It's just an area that we don't have a lot of information about. His family may have more information about it, but we actually haven't spoken since the 2003 gift. So I'm not sure. It would be kind of I would like to actually reach out to them and kind of pick their brains a little bit about if they know anything about that history of the family. But certainly with a little research, with a little genealogical research, we might be able to uncover some of the mystery of that transit.
Great. There's a couple questions about his working process. Did he have a studio, or did he have a darkroom in his home? What was his work environment? And then there's another question about sometimes it seems like he was in black and white, sometimes in sepia. Did he have a preference about how he worked?
Right. Yeah, I haven't found any photographs or documents that specifically show a home darkroom or what kind of facility he had for that. But we do have receipts of him buying darkroom chemistry. So obviously he did have a place, and I'm assuming that it was in his home. I would guess that at least for part of the time he was photographing and had a darkroom somewhere in his family home. He lived in a couple different places. I actually had a list of the addresses I meant to highlight that he had lived in, and I just skipped that over in my notes. Let me see if I can find it out. Yeah, so he lived on Center Street, Cranston Street, Walden Street, Prince Street, and Horn Way. Over the course of his time in JP, I think the Cranston Street address, both 46 and 49, I don't know whether that's because the numbering changed or why that numbering changed, but that was his family home where he raised his kids, and I believe it was a large enough home to accommodate, a basement darkroom. So I would assume, except for maybe when he was living in Horn Way, he was probably had his own darkroom, was printing his own work himself, and maybe later in his career he had to go to photo supply places or take his photographs out to be printed and developed, because he wouldn't have had, in elderly housing, you probably didn't have space to do that. As far as the sepia question, some of the discrepancy between the neutral tones and the warm tones were because the photographs I showed in the presentation we only had original negative. I always tried to supply the printed photograph to give the idea of how he was trying to show the image and how the image he was trying to create, but sometimes we only had the negative. But even within, even the photographs that were printed, there's a lot of range between the neutral and the sepia tones or selenium tones or whatever he did. So he experimented. I think he would make it depend on the particular composition or maybe what the client wanted. Whether the client maybe wanted something that was warmer and more, historical looking, or something that was more modern. And so he did a lot of work in the darkroom, not Photoshop work, not analog Photoshop work. It wasn't disguising things or faking things, except obviously with the multiples, because that was the whole point. But he was using all the tools, all the kind of burning and dodging and toning that he could do to make every image like sort of unique and different.
There are a couple of questions. I did post in the chat for everybody the link to the Digital Commonwealth collection. Is that all of the images, or is there still more to be digitized?
From what I understand, they have completely finished digitizing the collection, the photographic material in the collection. So the only thing that hasn't been digitized is the archival part of the collection, which is the correspondence and the objects, the books. Like one of the really cool things, we have the little hand embosser that he would use to emboss the photograph with his name. And sometimes I'll just go around and find a random piece of paper and stamp it Abdalian. So we have some objects, and we would love to digitize those and make them available, but it's kind of a different process that we use for that. So it might be a little while before we get that stuff done. But doing this talk, one of the great things for me was it gave me this excuse to go through the archival material and the correspondence. And it was really interesting. I mean, literally there were sometimes like pharmacy receipts. Like we have some of his just personal stuff, sometimes stuff that's so personal, I'm not going to mention it in this talk. And one time we had this sort of upset letter he wrote to someone about a relative who had yelled at him and his family, and he was very upset talking to that person's mother. So
Wow.
Really, it's fascinating. You have some of this personal correspondence, and it does kind of give you a little insight into the man and his approach to the world and his life.
There are a couple of questions that are very, very specific, and I can ask you those, or we can maybe just refer people to the digital. There's somebody asking, they had a grandfather whose name was Partag Karelian, and he had a barbershop. Do you know if there are any images of a barbershop?
I don't remember a barbershop, but he would also take photographs of people in their homes. So that wouldn't necessarily mean that he's not captured in one of these photographs. So, I mean, a lot of the photographs, the subjects are identified, but a lot of times there aren't. They're just sort of unidentified people in the photograph. So, you might just have to kind of browse around the site a little bit to try to see if you can, spot someone you recognize. He was really good about identifying his photograph, but it wasn't foolproof. And there are some photographs that are under-identified. And certainly as people visit the site, one thing I'll say that the easiest way to explore the Abdalian site is don't go through Digital Commonwealth directly. Go through go to the Boston Public Library homepage and find the digitized collection dropdown, digitized collections on Digital Commonwealth. And then when you go to that page, it will bring you to the Abdalian collection description, which has a little history of him and allows you to search just within his collection. And that's a much more effective way of browsing his collection.
isn't the link I shared, of course, but I will try and do that. And then there's another question that's very specific. There was a spa at the corner of Green and Elm Streets. Do you know if he took any pictures of that?
The only spa I remember seeing was Bob's Spa, but it's definitely possible. You know, I searched for if you know the name of the spa, or even the street it was on, you could try to narrow your search using those terms. But again, you know, just browsing the collection might, you know, it might, even though it might be a waste of time for identifying whether he took a photograph of that spa, it's always worth a look because the photographs are great. Yeah, I mean, that's what I did for this talk, is I went and looked through every single image in the collection, which I'd never done before. And that was a lot of fun.
Do you know if he's faced some discrimination from his coworkers when he was working on the Boston Herald? Do you have any correspondence to that effect, or?
No indication of that. You know, I mean, it seemed like, you know, that you know, it's probably somewhat a diverse group of men that, you know, obviously there's a lot of the two. I think it was just a coincidence. The two guys I showed in the photo on the slide were of Irish descent. I think, I don't remember the name of the person, but I think there's at least one other Armenian person who was working as a conductor. So, you know, he seemed to have a collegial relationship with his coworkers as far as the photographs I've seen. And I've seen no indication in the administrative material that there's any problems. But, you know, Abdalian, I don't think he's the kind of guy who would record that. You know, he was trying to be an American. He was of that generation of immigrants that believe that this is a new start for them. And this is his kind. He came so relatively young, you know, that, you know, he was, I think 10 years old when his family came. So, you know, I think in all intents and purposes, he was trying to be an American. And I'm sure he did face prejudice as a kid and names in school. And I think that was inevitable, you know, for any immigrant coming to America. But it didn't seem to be a formative thing for him.
Interesting. Okay, and there's one final question, and that is there a book of Leon's photographs?
There should be then.
Yes.
I invite anyone who attended the Zoom to find a publisher and do it. One of the things I forgot to mention in the talk, one of the many things I forgot to mention, was the fact that the 2003 gift by the family, it included the gift of the copyright, which was awesome, because what that allowed us to do, because the Boston Public Library does not claim any rights for their photos. Everything's, as it says on the front of our building in Copley Square, free to all. We used to charge fees for the use of photographs in the collection, and we stopped doing that because we realized, one, that's not what we're for. And plus the amount of paperwork you had to do was the money, it wasn't worth the money to do the invoicing and all that. So it was both a practical reason and a philosophical reason. Free to all. So the great thing about them giving copyright is it allowed us to effectively move the entire collection and all of Abdalian's photographs into the public domain. So several months ago when we allowed a harvest by the Digital Public Library of America. We allowed them to harvest all the public domain photographs in our collection, including Abdalian, so that they could go into Wiki Commons, so that they could be used freely by anybody with attribution. And that was a really great thing. And it also brought a lot of exposure to Abdalian himself. I'm seeing his photographs appear in newspapers and publications more now because they're free and available for use.
That's great. Well, everybody out there in Zoom land, you can rush and get those photographs and start a book, or maybe the JP Historical Society can do it. I don't know. We'll see what we can come up with. There were some questions. People had to leave a little bit early or send in comments. We are recording this. Aaron has very graciously allowed us to record it. So we'll be posting it on our website, hopefully in a few days, no later, and make sure that it's available to people who couldn't attend but we did have people from all over the world. People from England were emailing in. So it's pretty amazing what we can do now that we're virtual. So any parting words of wisdom, Aaron?
I will only say that my email is aschmidt@bpl.org, ASCHMIDT, and any questions that didn't come up, anything you think of later, any questions you have about the Abdalian collection or any other collection in our archive, that's what I'm here for, is to answer those questions. So, feel free to reach out anytime. I'm always glad to hear about it. And definitely, if you know something, if like oh, I know who that guy was in that photo, oh, please let me know. We'd love to know it.
That's great. I made a couple notes, so I will also put some things up in our social media of the things that you're looking for, because we might get some answers. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you, Aaron. This was wonderful. We really appreciate it. And have a lovely afternoon.
Yeah, sun's out.
Yeah. Bye-bye.